All right, everybody. We got another very special guest for you all. I want everybody to welcome to the show Steve Tanner. Welcome, Steve.
Hi there. Thanks for having me on the show. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's thank you for being here with the time difference and things like that. It can be a little late there. Um so yeah, I mean, we got a lot to talk about today. And because it's your first time, we have to do the annoying thing of putting you through the gauntlet of giving us your origin story. So it could be brief if you want, just what got you into comics and the whole Time Bomb comics. Where did that come about?
Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, I've been into comics since like most people who are into who kind of create comics today since I
Hmm.
was little. And I mean, I kind of grew up in the 1970s and 1980s, and that time in the UK, used to have weekly comics at the newsstands. New issues would come out every week.
Hmm.
So that's where I first kind of encountered comics, and I can't remember a time at home where there wasn't a comic in the house. I wasn't. I mean, I didn't have those kind of parents who were kind of anti-comics.
Hmm.
I know some people had that experience. My both my parents read comics when they were children themselves in the 40s and 50s. So they were kind of had a good kind of vibe about comics. So I always had a kind of comic bought for me, um, and my kind of interest really grew from there. I just love it. I always just look forward to having a weekly comic.
Hmm.
And I remember the first time seeing an advert on the TV for a comic, for a war comic called Battle Picture Weekly, which is one of the kind of classic weekly British comics that people now remember.
Hmm.
And I remember that was the first time I kind of badgered my parents to get me a specific comic rather than them buy something for me and just give it to me. Um,
Yeah.
and from there, that kind of started it all really. I always then kind of followed Battle, and then 2000 AD came out in 1977,
Hmm.
and I remember buying the first one of those. I still read that now. And at the time, there was the American comics, which were being reprinted in as black and white weekly comics. So that was kind of my lead in to the wider world of comics outside the UK. And then I discovered that the original comics were full color. So then I started buying the color Marvels and DC comics when they were available. And so by the time got to the I guess the mid 80s, where suddenly things like Dark Knight, Watchmen, all that kind of stuff suddenly kind of kicked off, and suddenly comics seemed to reach a whole new kind of plateau of I don't know if it was acceptance, but certainly there was a lot more relatability, a lot more awareness of comics.
Hmm.
By that time, I was already in the club. I was already kind of that's it. The drug was there, and ever since then I've been into comics. And comics really, they're a bit like the mafia because you can never get out once you're into them, no matter how you
Correct.
pretend. You're there always. So that kind of kind of my journey from way back then. And I'd always been into comics. I'd always gone to conventions, that kind of stuff. Um, I regularly used to go. They used to have one convention a year in London through
Hmm.
the 80s and the early 90s. That was it in the UK, just that one convention. So everyone would just go every September, and it would become like the mecca for if you're into comics in the UK. And that was a great experience. Lots of great memories from there, and I met people there. Kind of I still know today. Um, and then at the same time, along with that, I had that. I was obviously had that understanding that people were then creating comics themselves.
Hmm.
So again, through the 80s, that's something I started doing, and I start, and nothing grand, just kind of, small press kind of things.
Hmm.
But it was always something that was there. And then for one reason or another, I ended up not kind of moving away from comics, but I moved away from the UK. I spent some time working abroad,
Mm.
and I was out of the UK for about 13 years. When I got back to the UK, I saw a convention advertised, and I thought, oh, wow, I mean, with the years I'd go along. And I went along expecting it to be pretty much how I remembered it back
Mhm.
in the 80s and 90s. So I went there to that kind of that convention. And the thing that I really kind of noticed was different was that in the conventions I'd always been to in the past, there was all the kind of the guests and the back issues and the panels, that kind of thing, but there always seemed to be a handful of guys usually always with beards. And
Mhm.
they would always be kind of sat there with like a black and white kind of comic, which they created themselves. And they were great. I always used to kind of buy a couple of those, but it was always very much, it was kind of, you could tell it was kind of comics that they produced themselves.
Mhm.
You know, because you could see the passion there, but you know, it was definitely a difference between the stuff you see on the news on the shelves and the stuff these guys were producing.
Mhm.
And then when I went to the convention, and it was in 2006, these guys were there who were selling their own comics again, but there were less beards. I don't know if that's relevant. I kind of thought I'd mention it. And the quality of them was just remarkable. You know,
Mhm.
these were books that could sit, you know, next to the Marvels, the DCs, the
Yeah.
Indies in your local comic store, and you couldn't tell them apart. They were just brilliant. And I came away from that convention not only with just a big pile of these indie produced books, self-produced books, but also like a determination that I would be back at that convention the following year with my own comic behind the table and sitting there kind of chilling it.
Mhm.
And that's basically what I did. So over the next year, I kind of worked and developed a comic. And then in 2007, I was there with a kind of one-shot comic book of the brand name Time Bomb Comics. And it kind of went from there. That was the first time I kind of
Wow.
did it. And then ever since then, I've been kind of on the scene in the UK as a creator, stroke publisher, however what you want to call it. And
Mhm.
then over the years, then since 2007, Time Bomb has slowly kind of, I guess, evolved, but in a nice kind of steady way,
Yeah.
rather than trying to kind of run before you know you can walk. To the point where we now produce licensed comics. We produce kind of a monthly, a bi-monthly comic for the newsstands.
Mhm.
You know, we've become quite a name that's familiar in the UK independent comic scene. So much so that last year we picked up the Tripwire Award for best indie UK comics publisher in the UK.
Cool. That's
So
awesome.
it's been a real, you know, it's been a, I hate to use the word journey because that's a horrible the way that we use the word journey now.
Yeah.
But it very much has been that kind of progression from this tiny little small press enterprise to something now which you know we produce regular books. You know, we have a kind of regular titles, teams of creators. And yeah, and obviously I get to come on podcasts like this, which is brilliant.
That is
When
brilliant.
you're
That's awesome.
when you're growing up, I mean, so being from the States, Mike and I, we have this vision of what British comics were or are, and mostly that's Judge Dredd.
Yeah.
When you're growing up, like what were the kind of books being made in Britain? I know you were getting some of the reprints for the stuff that was happening over here in Marvel and DC, but what else was going on other than Judge Dredd?
Okay, well that's a great question, and the thing is to kind of understand that until 2000 AD came along with Judge Dredd and the other,
Right.
you know, science fiction in comics it wasn't, you know, it wasn't a kind of regular science fiction book title that's
Mhm.
being produced. You know, you had things like kind of Dan Dare in the Eagle in the 1950s, but the way that kind of British comics tended to be, they were always weekly
Okay.
anthology
Wow.
comics. So, you know, they would come out week by week. So you wouldn't have kind of monthly books. So every week you would have a comic, and it would contain 7, 8, or 9 different kind of stories, sometimes even more. And there were 3 types of comics that were being produced. There would be the comics for boys, which were the kind of like the action adventure war kind of stories.
Mhm.
Occasionally there would be kind of a science fiction story within that, but it's predominantly kind of adventure and war. Those are the kind of the comics. Then you'd have the comics for girls, and they were always named after a girl. So a girl's comic, I mean, whereas the boys' comic would be things like Action and Valiant and
Right.
Battle and Tornado, the girls' comics would be things like Tammy and Ginty and Sandy and Bunty and all those kind of things. But the stories in them always used to kind of be, all again, most of them would be kind of adventure stories, but they would tend to be more kind of grounded. But they would be more kind of young girls in peril kind of stories. So there was kind of like, you know, ballerinas who had broken legs, that kind of stuff, you know. But the art in those were actually fabulous. And at the time, I mean, I ignored them because, you know, the boys comics were for boys and the girls comics were for girls.
Right.
But obviously, I was coming to appreciate that some of the strips and some of the art in those girls comics was just phenomenal. They're some of the best stuff that's been produced in comics in the UK. And then the third category of comics were the humor titles. And they were kind of for boys and girls. So they would be usually single page kind of stories, which kind of ultimately be a couple of gags together, featuring regular characters. So they'd be characters like they'd be comics like Whoopi and Buster and Crazy, Cheeky, those kind of comics. So there was those three different types of comics that you would have. But it was just the abundance of them, which was really kind of astonishing. Because remember, these are all weekly titles, and you know, at the height of the how comics were published this way in the UK in the kind of 60s and 70s, we're looking at kind of 50, 60, 70 different titles coming out every single week without fail. You know, so you wouldn't see American comics, and the only times you would see them is if you went to the seaside. For some reason, at the seaside, the kind of the newsagents and the gift stores at the seaside, where the beaches are, they would have kind of American comics in there.
Interesting.
So it would almost like when you were on holiday, that's when you would buy kind of American comics. That's the only time you would see them. And then from the kind of the late 70s, that's when comic shops started appearing in the UK. With I mean, you know, Forbidden Planet, you'll have heard of, but you know, the other ones which are older. There was one called Dark They Were in Golden Eyed, which is in London. But this was, but they were more kind of almost science fiction bookstores that then started selling comics, imported comics, and it kind of grew from there. So by the time the 80s had arrived, there were then a number of comic stores across the UK. So the people then would kind of almost like you would graduate from the weekly comics to the kind of monthly American titles. And at the same time, then some British publishers started producing monthly comics. I mean, you mentioned 2000 AD with Judge Dredd. The Judge Dredd magazine was one of the first monthly British comics to be produced in the UK in the 1980s. So that's how it all went. But it was the newsagent would always be the place where you would get your comics. And there was just a plethora of titles to choose from.
Awesome.
Yeah, that's crazy how that developed like that. And I mean, now look at what you're talking about with Time Bomb Comics and getting receiving the award this year and things like that. That's pretty awesome of how it's grown.
Yeah, it's been great, and the thing is as well that you can see the I mean we publish a kind of range of kind of styles of titles and books. The only thing we tend not to publish, we don't do superhero books.
Yeah,
we cover the adventure, the science fiction, and that kind of thing. So you can kind of see in the books there is that kind of that history of you know the comics that we grew up with in the UK is kind of almost like reflected a bit in the tone and style of the books that we produce.
Yeah, and going through your books on the shop on your website, which we can actually just pull up right now and show everybody. So, not sure why it's not going. No, maybe not. But yeah, as I was going through, what I liked about a lot of it is your covers still remind me of that British comic boom style.
Yeah.
When I think of 2000 AD and some of those books that came out back then, obviously I wasn't alive, but I've read about these things and I've seen the covers and all that. They just remind me of that. So keeping that kind of that history alive through your covers is really interesting too.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the point, and so much so we've actually been able to use some of the artists that used to work on the British comics in the 50s and 60s and 70s to actually produce our covers. So some of the covers are produced by those
That's
artists
cool.
who would have produced those strips and those covers back in the day. So that's probably where that kind of the Brawler cover there. I mean, that's by John
Yeah.
Higgins,
Yep.
who you'll be familiar from Watchmen, the colors of Watchmen. He's
Yeah.
also an artist in his own right.
The
So
Brawler covers are amazing.
Yeah, so it's also that it's capturing that essence as well. So that's been great to work to feature some of these guys from back in the day, because they are certainly in the UK comics scene, they're giants. They really are.
Mhm.
They're every year, unfortunately, there's less and less of them around, because if you were working on a comic in the 1950s, the 1960s, you're going to be in your twilight years now, unfortunately.
Yeah, and this one for Spectrum is the one that really piqued my interest. Like, it really looks like a British comic through and through.
Oh, that's great. The artist for that one is Steve Pugh.
Oh, okay.
Who, so that's the artist.
That explains it then.
Yep. Yep. Wow. Yeah, there's a lot of great titles. And I noticed something. I mean, you talked about it in your submissions on your website. You talk about no superhero comics, but you also say that you like when people can submit, it can be any length of comic, because you do have the Brawler, right, which is an anthology series, but it's an ongoing anthology series. So you do all lengths of comics too, right?
Yeah, and I think as well. I mean, being able to kind of submit something which is kind of relatively kind of short and small is actually a really good thing to be able to do. I mean, again, we do a lot of anthology titles. Again, it's harking back to the comics we're familiar with when we were growing up. But I think the beauty of an anthology comic is that it has that mix of different stories in there, and certainly from a creator point of view, if it's much more feasible to get say a particular artist to do 6 or 8 pages for a complete story, rather than necessarily getting to do a complete 24-page book or a 80-page graphic novel or whatever. And I think from a new artist starting out, I think to be able to produce something which is essentially complete is really important, to have that in your portfolio and have that sense of accomplishment. And I think at the same time, for anyone who's writing comics, I mean, if you can tell a satisfying story in 3, 4, 5, 6 pages, which has a beginning, a middle, and end, and all the other things you need, if you can crack that, then you can easily tell a story in 24 pages and a full-length graphic novel. I mean, I think the anthology format is really is great to read, because you can enjoy a mix of styles and a different mix of stories from a reader perspective. But from a creator's perspective, it really encourages you to hone your craft and really kind of nail it down. And I think I've always been a fan of anthologies. So it's great to produce them ourselves.
I've always said with like the big two, when they do anthologies, mostly DC to be fair, to really pay attention to them, because it's rare that Tom King does an anthology story. It's usually going to be somebody that's like on the bottom of their roster and they're the ones making it. But a lot of times there's that one story or couple stories in there that are really, really great. And that's usually the guy or gal that's going to make it up to be bigger one day. So I always recommend those anthology books, because you might discover your new favorite writer there, just because if you can do it in so few pages and really intrigue somebody, then damn well they can do an ongoing book as well.
Right.
Yeah. And I think as well for as well, there's also appeals to the A-listers. So I mean, because we got a book coming out in a couple of months' time, which is a horror anthology called Bomb Scares, and one of the stories in there is a 6-page story by Liam Sharp.
Oh yeah.
So
nice.
So we'd never be able to get Liam Sharp to do a complete full book, because he's awesome. far too busy, and but. It's that kind of thing as well. So it goes to both ends of the spectrum. Yeah, it's great for the new guys, but it's also kind of attractive for the guys that have kind of have already established and already made.
I love Liam Sharp's art. That's great.
It's funny you say that, because the one that really intrigued me when I was going through your website, and I'll pull it up again, is Bomb Scares. Because Mike, look at those covers.
Yeah, those are amazing. Yeah. Yep.
You've got like Universal Monsters, you got Dracula in one of them, Frankenstein, both of them, all this, and it appeals right to my sensibilities. But hearing that Liam Sharp's doing a story in there is even more appealing because that's a guy that we both love.
Yeah.
So
and it's a beautiful story as well. Well, as you can imagine, it's I said it's 6 pages and it's just wonderful. It really is.
Wow.
Do these books make their way over to the States, or are you solely doing them online / in in England?
A combination, really. I mean, we since what we do a lot of kind of stuff as like a pre-order opportunity through Kickstarter. So since 2015, we've been doing that with pretty much all of our books. So from that, obviously, we have backers around the world, and usually of the books we publish when we do a kind of campaign now, more than 50% of the support tends to come from outside the UK. And on of those outside the UK, again, the predominantly is the US. So there are out there, but also we in the past we've had a couple of times we've gone through Diamond, and in the latest kind of previews catalog, we're featured in the catalog there with the first 2 issues of Spectrum and book 2 of Western Noir. And obviously that's in the catalog now. So anyone in the States can, or Canada or anywhere else that uses Diamond, can order it from there. And of course, the other thing as well with Quantum, we've got that's for sale already in Midtown Comics, and I think Chicago Comics as well, which is the other one that they're part of, I think. And Barnes and Noble, we're starting to distribute through Barnes and Noble from October. So it is mainly directly in the UK, but I mean we ship our books all over the world. One of the challenges is, and I'm sure you'll be familiar with yourself, is the cost sometimes of getting books across outside the UK. And for something like the Bomb Scares books, I mean the previous Bomb Scares books have been 100 pages each. They're chunky books. So they're all kind of printed on nice quality paper, so they're quite heavy. So I think that one of the kind of logistical challenges for us is being able to reach the international market without it being prohibitively expensive for the international market to order our books in the first place. But it's something which we're continually looking to kind of to develop and push. So I said we're back in the previews, and we're looking as we go forward now to have a larger presence in previews than we have done over the past few years.
That's awesome though. And you said Barnes and Noble too, so it must be like on the magazine rack. They carry some individual issues, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So we talked anthologies and the books coming out, and Quantum should be the 4th book coming out, right? Issue 4.
Yeah, it's issue 4. Issue 3 is out now.
Yeah, issue 3 is out now.
And because the way the kind of the newsstand distribution works, issue 3 came out in the UK on the 19th of August, but it won't be hitting Barnes and Noble until October. Okay, because it all goes sea freight.
Yep.
And then Quantum issue 4 will be released in the UK on the 17th of October. And then obviously in early in the new year, then it should hit Barnes and Noble then. So that'll be an ongoing arrangement with Quantum for as long as Barnes and Noble are interested in carrying it.
And that's another anthology series. Is there a specific type of genre? Is it like horror, sci-fi?
I mean, the thing is with Quantum, it was designed for the newsstand. Because and the reason is that certainly in the UK, people don't launch comics into newsstand anymore. They go direct to comic shops, or they go to Kickstarter, or they go or another crowdfunding platform or whatever. But we kind of realized that there was a market who still does buy comics from the newsagent. So the idea of Quantum was to actually to produce something which is aimed for that market. So we don't sell Quantum digital copies of Quantum. The only issue we sell of Quantum when we go to conventions is the first issue until they run out. we only offer it for sale through our web store once it's gone off sale in the newsagents. So it becomes so it's making it, it is mainly, the idea is you go to your newsagent and your newsstand to buy it. And it is an anthology, and the idea with Quantum, it's all stories under the bracket rules that are not our own. So we have kind of steampunk in there, science fiction steampunk. We have kind of Western horror. We have alternative kind of Earths. So we have those kind of stories that's in there, and it's something which we're hoping is appealing to that kind of crowd who buys their comics from newsagents and newsstands, but also to incentivize the guys who are already familiar with our titles to actually take the trip to the newsstand and actually buy it from the newsstand and support their newsstand at the same time. Because as we both know, the newsstands used to be such a core part of what comics were all about. And that kind of changed. But I always remember the thrill of going to the newsstand and seeing all the new comics you could get. And you tend not to have that anymore. So Quantum is trying to recapture that, but doing it in a way that it's kind of producing a quality book. So I mean that the format and the style is very similar to a lot of our books that we produce. So everything we do is perfect bound. So it's this really nice perfect bound book, 56 pages, nice thick cardstock cover, really good quality paper inside, and hopefully the stories will people like the stories as well, and making that kind of step from the kind of the traditional markets we've been really involved with, the comic shops, the conventions, and so on, to newsstand. That's been a massive kind of shift, and that's been the biggest kind of learning experience of it. The way that it works for the newsstand, the whole distribution model is completely different, and that's been the biggest learning curve. But I mean, the first issue came out in April this year in the UK. And so far, the reader response has been good, which is terrific. So people kind of like the stories, and again, because it's an anthology, some people like one story, some people like another story, but there doesn't seem to be any story in there that everyone agrees is like the run to the litter. There's something which everyone likes. So far it's kind of working, but it is but the Quantum book, that's running alongside the other titles we produce. So the amount of work that we've suddenly had to kind of do, and how we've had to adapt to that, and especially with things like the scheduling, that's been really something else. But it's nice that it's into the international markets as well. So I mean, Quantum's already on sale in Sweden, Finland, Holland, Germany, Malta, Australia, Canada, and obviously now I'll be hitting the United States in October. So we're kind of pleased so far with how it's going.
That's great.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's really awesome. And yeah, coming to Barnes and Noble is pretty accessible for almost everybody in the US, I would say. That's really cool news. And I mean, I'm looking forward to heading over there, because I didn't know that Barnes and Noble carried stuff like that. So I mean, obviously they carry the graphic novels, but I'd love to stop in there now and grab that issue when it comes out in October, for the US at least. Yeah.
Well, I hope you like it.
Yeah.
Please let us know.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So you mentioned real quick somewhere in there that you were also doing some books on Kickstarter.
Yeah.
Could you talk about what books are you doing there, and how often you've been doing Kickstarters for them?
We started using Kickstarter in 2015, and since then, every book that we've released, we've actually made it available on Kickstarter first. But we've always been very transparent that we never use Kickstarter as a kind of a funding model. We use it as a pre-order model. So every book that we know we're going to be publishing it anyway. But what we found, what we kind of like about the Kickstarters, is that the platform allows us to offer extras for people who kind of put their money down in advance. So I think that's a really kind of key thing about how the crowdfunding platform works when it comes to comics. So, for example, and you can get the digital edition of all the books. You can also then any of the printed copies, they come with the digital book as well. And of course, then you're able to kind of add in extras. So the most recent book we had on Kickstarter was the second Spectrum book, which is the licensed anthology series we do with the Jerry Anderson Entertainment. So it features new comic stories of Captain Scarlet, Terrorhawks, and Space Precinct. And through using that with Kickstarter, we're able to kind of give people who kind of buy the comic through that platform kind of limited kind of prints of Captain Scarlet and the other kind of characters, and just so they get something more for their buck. So that's how we use Kickstarter. So we find that's a really effective platform to use, and because the books are released within 2 to 3 months maximum of when the Kickstarter closes. So it's kind of almost like the same window as if you were to kind of see a new title in previews. You tell your comic store you'd like it, and then 2 to 3 months later, then it turns up. So it's using that same kind of time scale, but being able to offer extras for the people that kind of want the advanced copies as well.
I think that's a great idea to use it that way.
Yeah. I was zooming through some of them real quick to see, and you've been really successful on Kickstarter as well, like blowing past your goals for every single one I've pulled up so far.
Yeah, well, we've done 24 Kickstarters, and all 24 have been successful. But I mean, I think part of it is that we don't ask for ridiculous amounts. I mean, I'm a great kind of supporter of the platform myself, so I get a lot of books through Kickstarter. I think it's a great platform to support other kind of creators and other publishers, and just find some really cool stuff. And I think one of the kind of the nice things about it is that if you're running a Kickstarter, I think if you're offering something and it seems like a really decent kind of, it's fairly priced and it looks quality, and you're getting something else with it, then I think it's a real great incentive. And I think that's where the beauty of the Kickstarter comes in. And because we're always going to publish the book no matter what, we're not asking for tens of thousands of dollars. We basically ask for a relatively small amount, so we can hit that, and then we can start opening up stretch goals and adding in stretch goals. So the packages that people can get, 9 times out of 10, the value of what they receive far exceeds what they actually pledged for that book in the first place. I always kind of think with Kickstarters and the other crowdfunders that the backers themselves is almost like it's work like the angels who support theatre, and with the angels who support the theatre. If you support a theatre production as an angel, then when the play or performance is finally being unleashed to the public, usually the angel gets something extra. They'll get the best seating. They'll get something else. They'll get something that makes it worth their while. So it's kind of treating the backers almost the equivalent of the theatre angels, making sure that they get something more. And that's a key part of our Kickstarter strategy, and that seems to work. Because it's because there's nothing worse than feeling ripped off if you've done supported some Kickstarter and it's never appeared, or what turns up is very, very different from what you were sold in the first place. So it's just about rewarding backers, because every backer, if they back once, hopefully they'll back again. And it builds up that kind of readership and that kind of following. So that's been, I think if you do it properly, you can do it really well. And I think it's about thinking about how you're going to do it, and making sure that your project comes across as a worthwhile investment.
Very
Yeah,
cool.
definitely.
Yeah, I like the business model. I really like the projects you're putting out, and I can't wait to see what the future brings, Steve. So, if we want our listeners or our viewers to kind of follow everything you're doing, would we just direct them to the website, or do you have social media presence with the publishing? Or
We have both. We got the timebombcomics.com is the website, but also we're on Facebook. We're
Mhm.
on X, as it's now called. We're on we're
We
on
don't-
I think we're on Instagram. I think we're on Blue Sky as well. So and you know, and there's multiple ways to get in touch with us.
Great.
Awesome. And to everybody out there, I'll have a link to Time Bomb's website in the show notes down below, so you can click and check out some of the cool books we're talking about today, and maybe even buy a few if you're feeling frisky. Steve, thank you so much for taking the time today and stopping by. It was a blast having you, and we look forward to seeing how all these books turn out in the future, man.
Thanks, guys. It's been great chatting. Thank you.